back to desktop.
I'll go to clicker.
So we've got a couple of things to run before you, so we'll do that off the desktop and then we'll just cross over to you, okay?
All good.
Internet. Oh, Lectin radio mic.
Is there a mic?
Are we getting your mic?
Oh, radio mic. That's right.
This one will be for you.
I'll adjust the level just to make sure it's all good. But that's for you, and that's off at the moment.
Great. Cheers.
Okay. So,
Poll everywhere. We'll try that.
did you run through with Craig the idea of that poll?
Well, you saw it, didn't you? I haven't done anything yet. Just we thought we'd warm them up with a couple of questions.
Yeah, I like that idea. It's good.
Log in.
Just off to the side, over on the left. Yep, thanks.
So do you want to check this mic and see?
That looks all right.
Craig, is your mic
Several
on?
add-ons already.
No, it's not.
Toggle full screen.
What do I do? Just on the side there?
Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me at the back? Cool. Thank you.
We'll pick it up.
Okay, that's working,
Okay.
I think.
So I'll show you what I did.
Full screen. Yeah, okay, I'm just checking they will come up. It's a bit slow. Should work. Next. 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 And at the end, if we want, because I have got this that we can put up afterwards, if you'd like to ask Craig a question or comment, we can put that up and they can tweet them in if they want to as well. It's up to you. We don't have to, but it's a backup if we want. Because some people get a bit nervous about asking questions. Here's Peter.
Craig,
Peter, how are you?
Good to meet you. How are you?
Hi, Peter. Guest speaker is our Associate Dean Academic.
Great. But I'm not quite sure what the sequencing is.
Just
Yeah,
doing a
so-
pre-filler here.
All you need to do is the welcome as per the speech notes that I prepared, and just don't worry about the EPOL. So we're just going to put a slide up that's like a changeable between just UQ and then another one that says, do you want to interact? Text this Peter Ashworth 146 or something to a number. Peter's going to come on first, just as like to keep the crowd engaged, because there's already a big lineup out there. I don't know if you saw that. So she'll just go, hi, Peter, we're doing this poll, and just walk them through it. She's got
Yep.
it.
And I always just recognise the traditional owners.
Yep, Peter will do
I
that
have
as
to do
well.
that, yeah. Yeah, you do that, yeah. But I just do that as a matter of course.
Yep, that's fine.
And fire
so then-
exits. Fire.
I'll put that on my list.
Perfect. Okay, good.
All right, cool.
Perfect. Good.
Cool,
Yeah.
so you just do the...
I'll just do the
hi.
fun filler.
Yeah.
So
She's
you're
the
on
crowd
first.
pleaser.
Yeah.
You're on first, then I'm on.
Yep. I'll set this up.
And you're going to show that short video too?
Yeah.
There's a couple of hours.
Peter, I have something for you to check out as well.
Okay, so will we see the results of these?
Yeah, they're
pages?
live. So come back to the mic so you don't see them. Click that one. I'm sure you've got a very skewed audience. No?
Seb works in Steve Forster's team, but not official, and he's obviously said don't send it, so as soon as you do, it gets sent. So, see the BEM number? That's the thing. 66, 176. Maybe we should do a campaign around that. Sorry, Peter, just making sure that this is high definition, this one, so I want to make sure that's all good. Craig's got a microphone. You're welcome to use the lapel mic or the roving mic, whatever you're more comfortable with. Okay. It's the same. So he'll turn his on just before he speaks, so it doesn't go. Christine organised that.
Did you?
Yeah. I just wanted this link to work. I've got the video, but in lower res. So that's good. But it's very, very high. This is not.
Test.
Is it on the video or is it on?
I've got the video as another file, but this one would have been crisper to see. So the other thing I'll try is...
Sometimes YouTube, if you don't do the IMS thing, they...
No, this isn't on YouTube, otherwise that would have been super easy. Because these were only completed last week, like just before the event. So, alright, so that won't work. So, yeah.
Hello. How are you?
I'm well, yourself?
Not too bad.
So, yeah, we said 10 past. We're almost there.
Like upstairs and I know.
Just check that this works, and then we can do it. So, it's not working.
So you've got...
Oh, that was Craig's about there. Oh, Denny's is going to come later as well. Why is that not? This is playing from the PC.
So, yeah, it looks like it's muted on the PC. You're probably going to be very loud now, so...
Yeah, get ready to turn it down.
Measuring, understanding and delivering built and natural environment sustainability.
Cool.
Perfect. We have lift on. So
How long we can let them in?
so when they come in,
Yeah.
the video,
So it'll just go between this UQ logo, which they might want to get photos on or whatever, and then this.
I'll leave that up for a little bit.
So yeah, it just goes between 20 seconds and 30 or 40 seconds for a little bit. So it's got to work.
And
when the video plays, that'll be the cue. So it'll
That'll
go
be the
war and
cue for
waste.
everyone to be quiet.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Peter steps up and... Oh, no, so actually, so I'm still not following. So the poll stuff is happening just while people are coming in?
No, we're sort of just before we start. Everyone, there's some audience participation tonight, so if you want to get started, you'll see a little thing that you can text or put into your phone. So we're going to ask you some questions as it comes through. If you can text in so you're registered, ready to participate. Here. For those of you who've just come in, we have some audience participation, so make sure you log in ready to vote. We're interested in your views. Okay.
Measuring, understanding and delivering built and natural environment sustainability is a key focus of UQ Environmental Engineers. Currently, Australia produces 48 million tonnes of waste each year, and just under half of this is dumped into landfills.
We need to reduce the volume of waste generated as well as maximize resource and energy extraction from waste streams. In the state-of-the-art facilities at the University of Queensland, we are developing new technologies based on microbial processes to transform waste into energy and to extract heavy metals that can be harmful to the environment.
By the year 2100, a 1 metre sea level rise will displace or disrupt more than 140 million people. At the forefront of research into this global challenge, the UQ Environmental Engineering Group are measuring and documenting the first evidence of islands disappearing.
This alarming discovery of disappearing islands was made when we uncovered a global sea level rise hotspot, providing a glimpse into the future. And this finding really shifts the international debate from speculating on likely impacts to instead tackling the consequences of climate change.
4 billion people globally experience severe water scarcity. At UQ, environmental engineers are scrutinising the entire water supply chain, from the rehabilitation of streams to monitoring the downstream effects of sewage discharge.
To better understand and predict future water quality and quantity, we integrate large-scale monitoring networks with catchment and reservoir numerical models, specialising in the hydrodynamics, sediment transportation and biogeochemical cycling.
Solving these challenges will ensure that quality of life is maintained around the globe into the 22nd century.
Can you hear me? Perfect. Okay, before we get into the proceedings, we've got a little bit of a warm-up exercise. My name's Peter Ashworth and I'm Chair in Sustainable Energy Futures here at UQ, and we're very excited to have everyone here, and we thought it might be interesting to kickstart to sort of see what sort of audience do we have here. Before we start, here at UQ, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land at which we stand, past, present and emerging. But while you're waiting there, you can see there's 2 different ways that you can respond to this poll. It's very simple. You can either use the internet and put in thepollev.com/Peter Ashworth 142, or if you've got your mobile, text Peter Ashworth in capitals 142 to that number there, +61 or 0427 541 357. Okay. So, the first question is, how did you travel to UQ campus today? So what you need to do is text A if you came by car, B on foot, C cycled, by public transport, or E plane. I reckon we know who E is. It's usually anonymous. And in each of these questions, please answer honestly. So we've got quite a few coming by car, a goodly number by public transport. Okay. Next one. So how many spare mobile phones do you have in your drawer at home? A, none, I recycled them all, golden star. None, I threw them all away. 1 to 2, 3 to 4, or 5 plus. Okay, next question. Looks like there's a few in the drawers there, Craig. How often do you use a reusable coffee cup? A, never, B, sometimes, C, often, D, always. This could be an impact from your war on waste, Craig. I think my daughter's probably in the never, 23% then. Okay, so we've got 22% that don't. Maybe you don't drink coffee if we think, you know, helps, hopefully. Sometimes, often, with most 39% always. Okay, answer honestly. How often do you recycle when you're at home? A, never. B, sometimes. C, often. D, always. Okay. That was pretty clear. The large majority. Let's have a look at the next one though. How often do you recycle when you're on campus? A, never. B, sometimes. C, often. D, always. It's a little bit harder sometimes, I would suggest. So 55% still manage to do it, 22% often, and I think this is the final question. Do you believe single-use plastic bags or plastic should be banned on campus? A, yes. B, no. No idea. I don't think we get many in this audience. Perfect. Thank you very much. There we go. Good. Might just close that down. Yeah, perfect. Cheers.
Okay, good evening and welcome to this event, and thank you for joining us on campus tonight, and hopefully it's a fun and informative evening. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. My name is Peter Sutton. I'm the Associate Dean Academic in the Faculty of Engineering, Architecture and IT. And again, I welcome you to the faculty and to the university in some cases tonight. Some housekeeping things to start with. You've all just had your mobile phones out. Can you please make sure they're on silent for the talk? If you need the restrooms, you'll find them out the door, either level 3 or level 2, and round to the left. If by some chance we need to evacuate the building tonight, again the exits from this room are up the back on level 3 or round the back here on level 2, and the gathering point is over in the grassy amphitheatre to the north of the building. I'd like to welcome members of the Energy Initiative Network tonight, members of our alumni, UQ staff, and in particular I'd like to extend a special welcome to our Hawken, Birrell and Prentice scholars. Those are our top students in engineering, architecture and computing here in the EAIT faculty. This evening is an opportunity for you to engage with your peers and members of the community, members of our Energy Initiative. Please take that opportunity to mingle and engage with others at the end of the evening. We always say to our EAIT scholars, this is one of the opportunities that we give you to improve your experience at UQ, and networking with others is an important part of that. So I encourage you to take part in that at the end of the evening. The question we're going to explore tonight, and that applies to us all, is what the future will look like if we continue the way we currently produce waste. Australia is one of the most wasteful countries in the developed world, and the rate at which we're producing waste is growing faster than our population. One person who has certainly declared war on waste is our guest speaker tonight. So many of you will know Craig Reucassel from his work with The Chaser or CNNN, but his latest series, War on Waste, has had a significant impact in Australian homes, and it's changing attitudes of people towards their waste and what they purchase and so on. And this show has highlighted the damage we do when we throw things away that could be recycled, when we waste food and resources and ignore the impact of what we do on the environment. Season 1 of the show won a Logie Award for the most outstanding factual or documentary program at the TV Week Logie Awards. So, to learn more, please join me in welcoming Craig Reucassel to the stage.
Thank you, Peter. Is that working? Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Peter, as well. Thanks for coming along. I was the person who took a plane, so you can boo at me, but I did carbon offset it, as I always did, which is about as well I could do, and I did take the train in from the airport. So I tried in some ways there. This is a much larger group of people than I expected. Also, I was told it was the elite scholars. There's a lot of children here tonight, so you're either very smart for your age, you've been smuggled in, and you're probably going to be disappointed because this is slightly more aimed at elite scholars. But anyway, that's fine. The elite scholars, to be honest, it also puts me slightly on edge. I feel slightly nervous in front of this crowd. I'm just used to answering people's questions like, what bin do I put things in? The most common question at the moment is, what bin do I put ex-prime ministers in? It's a growing waste stream in this country. So anyway, look, it is really good to be here, and it's good to be back in Queensland. I actually spent a great deal of the time doing the War and Waste show in Queensland. And the reason for that's not the first reason you might expect, which is that Queensland has a terrible response to waste in most cases. That's not the main reason we're here. The main reason we're here is they have quite lax laws about using GPSs. So we couldn't actually put GPSs in a lot of things in other states. So that's why I kept having to be in Queensland. So for instance, when we put the GPSs in to see what was happening with the soft plastics recycling in the supermarkets, and it was fascinating that because one of the heads of marketing at Woolworths, the night it was going to air, just happened to be sitting next to one of the really good friends of the EP at a charity dinner. Didn't actually realise this. And so he's there talking to people going, oh, gee, I really hope it doesn't end up in a landfill. I really hope it doesn't end up in a landfill. And it ended up in a landfill. So the next one ended up in China, which I thought was going to be fine. This would be fine. There is recycling there. And then when we asked them what was happening, they refused to answer. It was a very bizarre situation. So that's why we constantly came to Queensland, was to check out the GPSs. And it was a great thing. It's amazing how it actually led to Woolworths has changed the way they recycle their soft plastics, unsurprisingly perhaps, and now do it properly. So that's good to see. It's a minor victory there. And that's what I guess I'm going to talk about today. I'm talking about change and how you get change and what are the barriers to change really as well. I mean, this is an audience of engineers and architects and IT people, so you're at the kind of forefront of innovation really. You solve problems using technology and knowledge and all this kind of stuff. I'm from a different background. I'm from a political science background, a media background, and a law background, and economics background. So really, I'm generally one of the excuses used for not using your great ideas. That's what I'm often looking at, because often I found it frustrating in the kind of in the waste thing, is often you go, wow, there's technology here that can solve this problem, but it's not necessarily being used. And trying to find out why was one of the big things that we looked into. I mean, architects, for instance, how much knowledge do we have about passive heating and insulation and shading and all this kind of stuff? And how often do you see these ridiculous houses built that don't use any of that knowledge at all? It's amazing. I mean, engineers, we've created enough technology now to massively reduce our carbon footprint. And yet we can't even get the world's most conservative national energy guarantee through our parliament without losing a prime minister. I mean, that's how ridiculous it is. So I guess maybe I'm here to disappoint you and go, well, you can come up with solutions, but for some idiotic reason we're not going to use them. But no, that's not the case. So the questions I guess I'm fascinated by are, how do you change people's minds? How do you change people's behaviours? How do you change businesses' behaviour and minds? And how do you change the mind of government? And that's a hard one. For many years, when I was a member of the Chaser, we would use the approach of hassling government members constantly. So when John Howard was Prime Minister, I chased him with a bus, an axe, a chainsaw, a DeLorean, gave him an ethanol lollipop. None of these things ever changed his mind in any way. As a matter of fact, the only thing that ever changed anything to do with John Howard was, I know there's one thing that changed, and I know that's that we changed his personal phone number by printing it on the front page of our newspaper. was the actual phone number of Kirribilli House. Somebody had given it to me, and when he was ignoring, there was the giant marches for calling for him to apologise to the stolen generation, and he refused to acknowledge it, so we printed his phone number on the front page. But I did act like a journalist. I did call it the night we were going to print it, and I pretended I had a wrong number. I said, "Is Phil there?" And then I heard the voice and thought, "Okay, that's the right number, let's hang it up." The good part about that as well is that a week or so after it was printed, the federal police came to our office and said, "Look, you haven't broken the law, we just want to find out where you got it." And that was a really great thing because we didn't know whether we'd broken the law. So anyway. But the war on waste, on the other hand, has perhaps surprised me, because coming to this with no expectation of change or expectation of very low change, it achieved a lot more change than I expected. And I'm not claiming credit for that. I think a lot of the decisions we made were things that in hindsight I go, "Oh, that helped do it," or otherwise, but I'm not saying that we're geniuses up front. Now, I was going to just quickly, for those people who didn't know the war on waste, just show a little bit of it. I realise from outside maybe most of you have seen it, but anyway, apologies for those who have seen it. I'll just play a little so that we all kind of know what we're talking about.
Australia, we're one of the most wasteful countries in the developed world. Every year the waste we generate is growing at twice the rate of our population. As a nation, we use over 10 million plastic bags a day, causing a crisis in our oceans. So how did it come to this? To find out, I'm going to dive into Australia's waste problem.
I saw about 5 fish and a lot more rubbish.
Challenge the street of everyday Aussies.
Can I steal your bin?
Sure. To reduce the staggering amount of waste we're producing.
The average family throws out over 3.5
mountains of food waste happening on farms.
I don't like to watch that.
I go head to head with the major supermarkets and confront them on their cosmetic standards.
If you look at some of our odd bunch range, it's been going for a while, and
No, but it's not odd bunch. No, but I'm saying put it on with your proper stuff. I chase down the politicians.
Mike, wait for me.
I've got a child.
You want to protect that child's future?
And ask why they haven't banned the plastic bag.
You're the Environment Minister. You want to sort this out?
And show the shocking consequences of our addiction to fast fashion.
Every 10 minutes we throw out this many clothes.
Will we all think differently about our morning ritual?
We're declaring a war on waste, Melbourne.
When we learn the facts?
50,000 coffee cups in this tram alone, and we throw out 1 billion a year. They all go to landfill.
I want to find out why we've become a throwaway society.
And more importantly, what can we do about it? It's time to start a war on waste. So, for those who haven't seen it, that's kind of what it's about. Before I talk, though, just about waste, I just want to actually start and take a step back from that. And that is to kind of ask the question is, what is the environment for environmental change like in Australia? And it's not great, let's face it. I thought this was a great article. More than half of federal Liberal MPs don't trust climate science. That was the think tank. I think that's exaggerated because that's the IPA, which is a Conservative think tank. But we have seen recently, of course, the Australian PM dumps key climate policy to stave off leadership revolt. That worked well, didn't it? It really worked. But that's the kind of environment we're in at the moment. We're in this kind of ridiculous environment. It was interesting going to Sweden to look at their waste to energy approach there. And something that was just noticeable once you've been there for a while is that there was no debate about whether climate change was real or not. That was not a political debate. That, you know, all sides of politics agree with that. Now, the latest Swedish election, they are starting to follow us with becoming more racist, I've noticed, but they are still, in terms of climate change, it's not part of the debate. So when you're in a debate there about what's happening, you don't have to overcome that first barrier, which is to say, yes, climate change is a real thing, it's created by humans and that. So it's amazing how much different it felt after a while. It was only after a while being there that I actually noticed that was the case. And look, just, you know, this only happened last week as well. This is, of course, we had the new Prime Minister saying that we're going to make the Paris climate change thing at a canter. We're going to make it at a canter about the same day that the Environment Office of Government put out this graph which showed, there you go, that line is actually Paris there at 2030, and we've been going up there. So we're in this kind of ridiculous situation where climate change in Australia has meant that the environmental debate gets caught up in it, and it's really frustrating. So it was interesting from my perspective, just war on waste, as to what happened with that and how that interacted with it. Because at its core, a lot of the stuff to do with waste is actually about climate change. It's one of the big things. When you look at a life cycle assessment of climate, of, you know, waste or food or anything like that. One of the biggest components you're looking at are things like energy, greenhouse gas emissions. A lot of this is kind of, it's in that area. It's totally about climate change. But I think particularly in the first series, we didn't really put it in that, frame it in that sense. We didn't talk about climate change necessarily. And it didn't seem to get caught up in that kind of political debate that occurred. There's a great thing here from the EC. It's difficult for citizens to relate personal consumption behaviour to large-scale problems such as climate change. Whereas I think with waste, for people it was very much easy for them to associate with. It's very visible. It feels like it's in your kitchen. You're dealing with it. It's something you're relatable and it's something that you can feel like you can control. So I think that's one of the things in the end that meant that people were able to, you know, become more motivated or feel like they could actually change that. Waste, as I said, didn't feel like part of the climate change debate. And I was thinking about this more recently, though. I think I was actually slightly naive in why I thought this was the case. Until recently, did you see the Grattan report stuff? There's been a lot of stuff recently about money and politics in Australia. And I think I thought, it wasn't part of the climate debate because we didn't talk about it that way, although in the second series I intentionally did talk about greenhouse gas and footprint and that kind of thing to try and bring that narrative into it. But I think one of the real reasons it wasn't is that in the end it wasn't opposing some of those large players that essentially fund the major parties when it comes to opposing climate change. And that's something I think I often forget in Australia. But that's a big part. The reason that the further you get up in government, the more climate change becomes contested is because that's where the money from mining companies and coal companies is actually going. And that's really one of the big parts of the explanation of this problem. So hopefully we can solve that problem as we go. I think one of the other things with waste, though, is that, again, it's very visual. Like you can show plastic in birds or plastic in fish, or you can show, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is apparently the size of Queensland now. Extraordinary. It's probably, maybe New South Wales could beat that Queensland in. So. But no, it's extraordinary. These kind of things are very visceral and visual, and you can actually, I think that helps with it as well. But that said, when it comes to climate change and when it comes to energy and all this kind of stuff, there's also visible things nowadays. I mean, that early thing there saying disappearing island, that's a visible thing when we see the droughts and that kind of stuff. But I was thinking about what's the difference? And I think the difference is that, one, it's still in the crazy world we live in, one of them is still contested. It's like, yes, there's droughts, always been droughts. Yes, there's fire. It's always that response of, yes, but that's not because of humans or something like that. Whereas with garbage, it's very hard to go, no, that was the fish that put that there. Nothing to do with us humans. It's a lot harder to contest it. So the kind of visual element of it, I think also helped it along there. And it's something that is kind of bugging me a lot at the moment because I'd love to do a similar kind of show at the War on Waste about climate change. And I keep kind of thinking about how do you do that visual link and how do you motivate people through that? Because a lot of people obviously are motivated, but there's obviously a lot of people who aren't motivated on that front. So if anyone has the answers to that, I'd love to know, and we can sort it out together. But okay, the other thing I want to talk about though is and this is interesting because I think I came to this show with the wrong perspective in a way. I thought the big way to achieve change, or the most, was to get government, to hassle government to change policies. Now, because I'd kind of studied enough of the history of waste in Australia and seen that, for instance, the plastic bag bans that they talked about in the early 2000s and then 2006 and 2008 and then now, and basically they keep bringing it up, they keep promising they're going to do it, they keep ditching that idea. We thought, okay, it's going to be frustrating if we put a show out there that just pushes for change but doesn't kind of show people what you can do yourself. So we spent an enormous amount of time also looking for solutions for people to undertake themselves. But in terms of what actually happened after the show, it was interesting. I think from government's end, governments were really unresponsive, or really quite slow to respond. They have, though, huge amount of power to make change, though. They can obviously make much bigger changes, but the thing I found is that governments around the place are generally really resistant to making anything mandatory. They don't want to make an actual rule. They're very happy to put like airy-fairy targets out there, but they don't want to actually make a rule. And there's a great quote. After the Ipswich Council said we're not going to take recycling anymore and everyone kind of lost their minds over whether or not we're going to lose our recycling, Ipswich Council is not the average council, is it, people? We're in Queensland now, we can talk about that. But there was a waste report done in Queensland, and Queensland is really behind on it. But this, to me, summed up what happens with waste debate around Australia. This was a quote in the report, which I thought was written in beautiful bureaucraties, but it said, "The heavy reliance on implementation through voluntary action plans, which did not eventuate, impeded the strategy's success." So let's just break that down. The reliance on rules that no one actually had to undertake, that no one did actually undertake, meant we didn't achieve a great deal. What a surprise. It's interesting, this report, if Queensland's actually, the response to that, at the moment, there's some kind of nice signs in waste. Queensland actually could become quite far ahead of other states actually at the moment in terms of their responses. If they follow what's in that plan, it'll become one of the better places around Australia. But that for me sums up the general approach I get when I speak to him. When I speak to Josh Frydenberg particularly, he'd know about all these problems and he'd say this kind of stuff and it's like, okay, so is this going to be a rule about this? No, we'll let that to business or somebody else to deal with. So that was the approach. That said, business surprised me the other way. They were much more responsive than I expected, but obviously there's a limit to that kind of thing. And there's an interesting thing that I recognised, and I hadn't really thought about this before, and I think this is a good thing to consider for people who are trying to bring about change. Big businesses in Australia are these massive institutions, and they actually have so many competing interests. They're like mini towns in a sense. They've got a lot of competing interests in there. And I would have a lot of people who are sustainability people in big companies come to me and say, look, War and Waste has been great because it's given me access to the CEO for the first time, or the CEO's finally, the CEO's kids hassled him because he watched War and Waste at school. So he's suddenly asking, what are we doing about this? And he's like, oh, we've got a sustainability. Really? I didn't know we had a sustainability person. Suddenly, they get in. And it just changed the argument in that company where the kind of competing interests lie, and actually meant that you could get more change. So things like, for me, I was very surprised, for instance, Woolworths went out and said, we're going to do the plastic bag ban, even in the states that didn't have that legislation. That surprised me. And what I mean by limited, though, is, again, it means only those companies that have decided to do it have done it. There's, again, no kind of push for it. But the thing that was most surprising me was just how responsive the public was. It's hugely responsive. So many people kind of did things. I mean, there were kind of crazy things, obviously, things like reusable coffee cups, 600% increase in sales and that kind of thing. Worms for composting, for kind of, they sold out for like 2 months in most states. It was kind of a weird thing. People responded and were active about it, which is fantastic to see. Obviously, though, the thing with individuals, though, is it was a kind of restrictive capacity. They can do a lot of stuff, but then you get to a point and go, hang on, the next step here, I need the council or the government or someone else to help me and take the next thing. And also, it also means you only get those people that care. How do you change the behaviour? The bigger thing I'm always interested in, how do you change the behaviour of the people that don't care about that, don't care if a dolphin chokes on something? That's the kind of harder question. And it's interesting, just to go back to the first one, I've also noticed it's the lower down you go, so councils I found were so much more responsive than state, than federal. It's kind of like the lower you go, the more response you can get, which I think is a really, if you're looking for change, don't necessarily, maybe you're smarter than me, but coming from my political science background, I was like, federal government's where it's at. That's where you should aim. But in actual fact, you can sometimes achieve more underneath and it kind of bubbles up. And I think it's interesting as well that I think that more people from the public were probably more pushing government to change because they're doing something themselves as well. So that's kind of, it was an interesting kind of side of it. So that, I got it all wrong, but it's great. I think you basically, when you're looking for change in these areas, you need to try and do it at all levels. But to go back to that thing about one of the things we looked at is we spent a lot of time trying to find the solutions to problems. We kind of find this problem and then go, I don't want to just put this to air and go, it's terrible. Can't do anything. You wanted to actually look for solutions. And that to be honest, was quite hard. It's my kind of solution. I call it the Rubik's Cube problem. It's kind of like, so for instance, if you're going to look at the red one's plastic packaging. We want to solve plastic packaging. So you kind of think, okay, well, we'll replace it with paper then. But then you go, okay, hang on, that's probably going to lead to a larger carbon emission footprint, and that has greater water use and all this kind of stuff. You go, okay, so there's not necessarily a simple solution between those two. Food waste and safety. Plastic packaging, in a lot of cases you don't need it when you go to supermarkets, but in a lot of cases it's there for food safety and for food waste reasons, and that's something else I want to stop. I want to reduce that kind of thing. This is why I was one of the 2 people that voted to not getting rid of single-use plastic straight away on that thing, because I don't know the answer yet on that. There's complexities about it. It's actually hard. Infrastructure. So this is one of the things that kills me constantly is you go, okay, coffee cups, for instance. The first thing we saw, okay, the solution to this is the plastic's inside the coffee cups. It doesn't get recycled, so what about bio-cups? Bio-cups, of course, use things like cornstarch or whatever to make plastic. They're compostable, right? Great, there's your solution. You look into it, then you go, okay, this doesn't compost in your backyard thing. It needs to be going to a commercial composting system. Now, in most places don't have a commercial composting system. There's no route to get it there. So if you actually start going bio-cups, half people go bio-cups, half people go coffee cups, it actually just confuses the whole thing. And nobody knows what to recycle or what to do with it in the first place. And it's a really frustrating thing is that a lot of the answers you go, okay, we could do this if we had all these other solutions here. But that's not necessarily the case. So that's, banging our head against the wall. Equity issues again. Plastic. One of the most frustrating things about plastic and plastic waste issues is it's incredibly cheap. So cheap. And every time you go and look at an alternative option or you go to a shop and say, hey, why don't you get rid of these plastic straws and bring in paper straws? They go, well, it's 5 times more expensive. Who's going to pay for it? It's kind of and equity issues are a real issue. It's interesting how, the carbon tax when it came in, a big issue was kind of getting the money to cover people who obviously were going to pay more for electricity and that. And that was done. But despite that, it was still able to be tarnished with this notion that everyone was going to pay more. So there's all these different factors, and also the stakeholders. Are they willing to actually do anything about it? Supermarkets, if they have all the control, are they going to actually change? And it's amazing. Some people change so much. So if you look at coffee cups, right, all these little small coffee places, give you a 50-cent discount or a 20-cent discount if you bring in your own cup. You've got to realise that's entirely coming from their pocket. It probably costs them 2 cents to get the original cup. It's so cheap. So they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart. See, I've seen people, when people kind of hassle, I go, don't hassle those people. They're really doing it. It's amazing the fact that I think the Responsible Runners platform for that went from a few hundred to quite a few thousand now shops that do that. And you go, that's a shop doing that off their own bat, and they're taking their own money to try and encourage right behaviour. Then you go to the other hand, there's something, and you go, okay, let's bring in a container deposit scheme, which has proven to work around the world. Oh, Coca-Cola Amatil and Lion Nathan took the Northern Territory government to court to try and stop it, despite the fact they're doing it. It's stakeholders. This is a kind of, looking for a solution. And this is, for me, what was quite frustrating is so often I could go, okay, if I just focused on one side, if I just did plastic packaging, I could solve that problem. I can solve one. This is pretty much actually, by the way, my approach to Rubik's Cubes as well. I can only solve one side. This is probably a lot smarter audience that can do the whole thing. But I can just pretty much only solve the one side. And that's one of the problems with the solutions, is that you really, when looking for solutions in this area, you really need to consider all the different effects that it have. And that's what made this such a frustrating thing to do. And it's why I think change is much harder to get than you would otherwise. So, food waste. Let's look at food waste then. And I guess this takes an example of some of these things here. Food waste is a huge problem in Australia. And I'll start by just showing a little bit of the video, which you may have seen, of course, which dealt with the problem up in Cairns, where we went to visit the banana farm. And this is probably the moment that kind of most blew my mind in doing this series, because it was, people live in the city. We don't know what happens on farms or agriculture, kind of thing. But here's a little bit.
There's very strict supermarket specifications on sizing. Okay.
What's this?
So this is too big. There's a double in there as well, but your fingers are too long.
So what, that whole lot will go?
Correct. It's too long.
Seems ridiculous. How much do you lose at this stage?
Sometimes it goes up to as high as 40%. Right here.
Seriously,
right
at
here.
this point here?
Yes. All right, so we'll measure this banana, and 260 is acceptable.
So that much?
Makes it unacceptable.
And what about this side?
No, too small.
Too small?
Too small. Fruit gets thrown away because it's too fat.
Too fat as well?
Yeah, so too fat, too skinny, too short, too long, too marked, too ugly.
You're very judged if you're a banana, isn't it? It's like being a teenager in some ways. Yeah, I mean, this kind of blew my mind. This is ridiculous, and this was the waste of about a day and a half on this particular farm. But again, and it's not obviously just banana farms as well. There was an article that came out after the show showed that tomato waste was going up to 84% in some places. There's a lot of rejected potatoes out there as well, which is not quite as bad. But look, so again, the solutions. What's the solution to this? This was the